All right, we're live.
Are we?
Says we're live.
Okay. Welcome to the Critical Christian Podcasts. We're your host. What?
Your name?
Dan.
And Justin. We ask critical questions about the Bible and provide questionable answers. And after a full year of doing this and completing Genesis, we still don't know how to do an intro. So we're in Exodus now, right?
We are.
Very good.
Isn't that exciting?
I'm kind of excited to
I
jump
didn't
into
know if
Exodus.
we'd ever get there. I thought we were going to quit halfway through Genesis.
I got to be honest, I wasn't ready to quit in Genesis, but the Joseph narrative drug on for dang near a third of the book.
Genesis drug on.
Well, I mean,
that doesn't sound right. Dragged
a lot of
on.
chapters. Your drink's going to spill over, by the way.
Oh, why is it doing that?
I don't know. Carbonation's a funny thing. And make sure you do that right into the mic. Good thing this is live and we can't cut any of that out.
That's right.
So anyways, jumping into Exodus.
All right, Exodus.
So what do you need to know if you didn't watch anything in Genesis is that 70 children, including a couple of grandchildren, and also including the women and children that Simeon and Levi kidnapped from the town of Shechem, all go into Egypt because of the famine. And then they're there for 400 years. And then the story picks up in Exodus. That's pretty much all they need to know, right?
Yes.
They grew exceedingly.
Genesis doesn't have much to do with Exodus.
Not much.
Except for the end where they get, something, when they go into Egypt.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where it picks up.
Yeah. Now we're on Exodus. I think we're still reading in the New King James Version. Is that correct?
Oh, well, I mean, at times. Sometimes I'll add like the Message or something.
Yeah, definitely shouldn't do that.
Easier. Agree to disagree.
Anyways, with that out of the way, if you want to follow along, you can read in the New King James Version. And we'll be checking other versions along the way if we find some difficulties in the translation, or if necessary, we can look it up in the Hebrew. But this is usually not necessary unless there's some complications. So with that, Dan, can you start us and read verses 1 through 6?
I believe so. Now there are the names. Now these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt, each man and his household. Came with Jacob, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher.
I'm really excited about this.
I am not. All those who were descendants of Jacob were 70 persons, for Joseph was in Egypt already, and Joseph died, all his brothers, and all that generation. But, is that it? No, wait, but there's a seventh. But the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them.
Very good.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, and I think we both had some notes on this. What did you have jotted down?
I don't see how the Israelites would have multiplied that much more than the Egyptians, considering the Egyptians had been there for a while, presumably had many citizens and were able to make babies. And there's numerous mentions in the Bible where God mentions in the that descendants will be numerous, like stars in the sky or whatever. But still, from 20, how many baby-making women exactly? Because, I mean, most of that, well, then again, I guess we said, part of the 70 doesn't include the women, right?
Right, yeah. The 70 obviously doesn't include all of the women, even though I think there are 3 women in the list of 70.
So there would be a lot of women that were not accounted for. But
not only that, I think we kind of have to assume that some of the men came in married and the wives weren't counted. And then the ones who didn't come in married very well could have married nieces or possibly even an Egyptian, right? And remember, they still did have all of the women and children that they kidnapped from Shechem.
Right.
And one of those women could have been turned into a wife or a concubine and had children with.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I'm just saying. I mean, how long did it take for them to amass such a population? Because, I mean, how long were they in Egypt before they became slaves?
Well, the estimations vary, but some Talmudic authors say it was about 200 years. Some say it happened faster, some say it happened shorter. I think the reality of it is, if I had to guess, was they probably were there for dang near 3/4 of the 400 years before they got enslaved, if I had to guess. Only because it seems based on the wording of the passage that it was the Pharaoh that came after Ramses that may have enslaved them. It's really hard to tell because
No, that's what it sounded like because they
yeah.
liked Ramses, right?
Well, it seemed
Wasn't that the Joseph one?
what?
Ramses
No,
with.
well, we don't really know who the pharaoh was. All
Oh.
we know is that at some point, it seems like they built the storehouses of Pithom and Ramses
Mm.
during Ramses' lifetime, which means they probably got enslaved near I don't know, at some point during Ramses' 2 reign. And then maybe had their exodus after Ramses died. It's really hard to tell, to be quite honest, because the narrative just doesn't tell you who the pharaoh was when they came into Egypt. All it says is that they build the storehouses of Pithom and Ramses, and those were built while Ramses was the pharaoh.
Well, so I think what we can all agree on is that if it was 200, 300 years, you could have a lot of people, right? I mean, how many did America start with?
I actually did the math on the population growth
Nice.
already.
All
So
right.
if you go to the book of Numbers chapter 1 and go all the way down to like verse 45 or 46, it says that in like the second year that they left Egypt, they took a census of all of the fighting men, and there were like 605,000 fighting men. Based on population statistics, even conservative scholars and websites have been saying that this most likely gave them an overall population of about 2.4 million, somewhere in there, people when they left. And this is a high number, but it's not super unrealistic. Archaeology seems to suggest that the population of Egypt during the Bronze Age was anywhere between 1 million to 3 million people, depending on what part of the Bronze Age you're in. So it seems high if there were 2.5 million Hebrews there, and the overall population was only like 3 million to begin with. Because like 3/4 of the population would leave, and it seems like if there were that many Hebrews there, that they wouldn't be able to be enslaved by the minority population of Egyptians. But I did do the growth rate analysis, and it's a little high, but follow me here. So if they go out with 2.4 million and they came in with roughly 70, then you get an annual growth rate of about 2.6% or so, somewhere in that range. Now, for comparison, the highest world growth rate ever was 2.2%. That was in 1963, post-war. So during the baby boomer era.
Yeah.
I've never seen a higher growth rate than then in recorded history.
Okay.
That was 2.2%. So, according to the narrative, if they were there for 400 years, then they grew at the fastest rate ever in written history, but not so fast that it's impossible.
Right.
It is possible to grow at that rate. And remember, the narrative does say that God blessed them.
Yeah.
And like made them to multiply, right? But so I think we have to assume that the narrative, the multiplicity of the people is within the realm of possibility. But I think you would also want to say, even though it's in the realm of possibility, it seems likely that God had something to do with it. It would be unrealistic for slaves who had an infant mortality rate of at least 50% to grow at the fastest population rate in history. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
So God had to have a hand in there somehow, if that makes sense.
Do we know about the mortality rate?
Yeah, the infant mortality rate in the ancient Near East was about half. About half of all babies died,
Yeah. Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So you have to have a handful of people to replace the ones that don't make it and to replace the successive generations. Because over 400 years, all of your grandparents and great grandparents and great great grandparents are all dead already. They don't get to count towards the population growth.
Yeah.
So there's some funny stuff going
yeah,
on
true.
there. So, but all that to be said, it is numerically possible. I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibility that they could have grown at a 2.5% clip. It just seems to be that it's kind of a high number. But again, I'm not saying it's not possible. It definitely is possible. The other thing too, and this comes up a lot, we didn't really discuss it when we were in Genesis, although we could have in Genesis 46.
Okay.
A lot of people will take issue with where it said in verse 5. It said the total number of people born to Jacob was 70. And that's not a big issue until you read Acts chapter 7 when Stephen is stoned. He's the first Christian martyr. I believe that was Stephen who mentioned it. But in Acts chapter 7:14, it says Joseph sent word and invited his father and all of his relatives to come to him, 75 persons in all, which is interesting because you have to assume that Stephen either misremembered it or there was a textual variant or that he was including some people that weren't included in the original number. Like maybe he included Jacob in the 4 wives. That would give you 5 more, except that Rachel died. I actually think that's what happened. I think Stephen is just recalling from memory.
You know what I think?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a 5-person difference, so it doesn't matter.
I agree, but people argue over these types of things.
Why?
Well, because there are some people who believe that the Bible contains 0 contradictory details.
Okay.
On this, even though it is technically on the face of it a contradiction, I don't really think it is, because I don't think Stephen is quoting Exodus or Genesis.
How many numbers in Genesis were very likely to be fabricated?
Seems like a few.
You know, when you get into the divine numbers, right? That you try to show over and over again,
like the symbolic numbers.
Yeah.
Or like the lifespan of the early people living for hundreds of years. Yeah, there's definitely some numbers in there that seem implausible.
Like 40 days and 40 nights.
Yeah, or the repetition of numbers,
right?
Like 40.
Seems like a lot of it was written just to sound good.
Yeah, the sevens, the repeated use of sevens.
Yeah.
I agree. There's some funny
I'm surprised
stuff.
there weren't 77 people that went, huh?
I know. Actually, I thought about that, but 70 is important because the number 70 is typically the number of nations, and they sometimes represented Israel. They like the round number 70 because it kind of represented the call upon Israel that eventually knowledge of their God would encompass the entire world, and they would be ruling and reigning over all the people groups, all 70 nations of the world. Just like after the Tower of Babel, God split the nations into 70.
Oh, 70, really?
Yep, into 70 different nations.
Okay.
And they were divided according to the number of the sons of God. The 70 sons of El. That's a reference to that. So the only other thing, this is moving away from numbers. The only other thing that I thought was interesting in the opening was some of the wording. So there was some funny stuff. It says the number of people born to Jacob was 70. I was curious if that was actually what it was saying, because you don't hear that phrase a lot in Hebrew. Like it's not a common phrase. So I just looked it up real quick. And it literally says all of the souls that came from the groin of Jacob, or it says all of the souls coming from the groin of Jacob. It's a really interesting way of saying that. It's a little graphic. They could have just said all of the seed of Jacob or something, right? They wanted to let you know that
it was him.
Yeah, the product of his,
Yeah.
the fruit of his loins,
Right.
which that might be. I think I'll call my son the fruit of my loins for now on.
Yeah, don't do that.
No, not a good, not a good look.
Don't do it to his teachers, all right?
No, no, I don't think I'll do that to while he's in front of his
I
teachers.
like it. All right.
Anyway, any thoughts
Nope.
you had on any of that?
I'm done with that forever.
You didn't want to address the descendants ever again?
I think we talked about that in Genesis.
You don't
didn't
want to
we?
waste 20 minutes on numbers?
No, not really.
Fair enough.
Unless they're new numbers. These weren't. Okay.
We could spend an hour on genealogy if you want.
I know we could. I know you could. I know you could, yeah.
All right, let's move on then.
All right. 8. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. So let's say Joseph was a bit younger than the late king. Another king replaced the previous king, and that person was likely either related to the previous king, as in a son, or, well, that's it, isn't it? Things like lines of succession usually stay in the family, so I have no idea why the new king would not have known who Joseph was.
I had a thought.
All right.
I had a thought. And my thought is Joseph is dead. He dies in verse 6. It says, then Joseph died and all of his brothers and that whole generation. Okay, so the whole generation of Joseph and his brothers, they're dead. They're gone, right? But the people are still in Egypt, right? I think if we don't assume that the lineage of Joseph lives on, like in the memory of all the Egyptians, then it kind of makes sense because we're never told that there's like a successor to Joseph. Like Joseph was second in command, right? But we're never told that one of his kinfolk takes over for him when he dies. We don't know who took over. It could have been handed over to an Egyptian.
Right. I mean, it probably was, right?
You would think so, right? Because I bet a lot of people didn't even know he was Hebrew. They probably assumed he was Egyptian because he didn't even live in Goshen with them. Remember, he lived in the palace.
Right.
With his Egyptian wife and half Egyptian children. So my guess is when he died, they just replaced him with another Egyptian, and then eventually his memory kind of faded away. And they're like, then they're looking around like, what are these Hebrews doing here? You know what I mean?
Yeah, makes sense actually.
And that was my thought. So like when it said they didn't know Joseph, I assume they didn't remember the legend of Joseph. They didn't remember what Joseph did for them.
Yeah.
Because Joseph gone and dead. He's gone. That's how I took it.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, this would really be shortly after Joseph died, right?
Well, it doesn't say.
I mean, because how long? I mean, the old king probably died before Joseph died, right?
Well, listen to what it says in verse 6. It says, after they went into Egypt, it says, then Joseph died and all of his brothers and that whole generation. But the Israelites were fruitful and prolific, and they multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. It seems to sound like the new king came a number of generations after they were prolific.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't like 20 years later or something.
I don't think so. And the more I read it, the more it feels like the new king that arose over Egypt might be one of the last one or two kings before they leave. They make the Exodus. And the reason why I don't think it was Ramses, even if Ramses is a king that punishes them and makes them serve and build the storehouses, even if that was true according to the narrative, I'm not convinced that he was still king when they left. Because they travel different places shortly after the Exodus, and there are things that are named after Ramses. Like they're visiting places that are named after Ramses, which a lot of times that only happens later in someone's building career or after they're even dead. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So it's just hard to know. Everything with the timeline here is a guess. No one knows for sure.
I get that. You good?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's probably all we had to say on that.
All right.
There was a note from Nahum Sarna on the timeline. He says the most reasonable explanation for a change in fortune lies in the policies adopted by the pharaohs of the 19th dynasty. The 19th dynasty in Egypt is 1306 to 1200 BCE. Ironically, what that was during the reign of Ramses II. And I didn't record all the detail, but he does do a lot of political changes to the government and to the structure of the people group. And he embarked on building projects. And so that's why so many scholars think that this pharaoh here, just according to history, must be Ramses. Even though the biblical timeline doesn't exactly fit Ramses, it kind of has to be according to archaeology.
Okay.
Yeah.
No idea what that means or who that is.
Okay.
That stuff is really just over my head. You know what I mean?
Sure, that's fine. Well, let's move on to.
We can't. I need to give a shout out.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
I'm giving a shout out to some person who's watching. My sister.
That shall not be named.
Right. I just wanted to read a joke. She told me the other day that I thought was very funny.
I love a good joke.
Oh yeah, you'll love this one. It's the goodest.
Oh,
what do you call a low-fat Jew?
Oh, why do I feel like this didn't get us banned? I don't know.
An Israelite.
It's so bad.
Thought that was so funny. I had to write that down.
So bad. That's bad even for a dad joke.
It's pretty good. It was better than those other jokes you tried a long time ago. Remember that?
I like those jokes.
Like that one about he bruises coffee or something?
Was my favorite
I didn't get it.
The problem is that joke is predicated on the fact that you knew a previous really worn out joke that everybody tells.
Right. Yeah. What was that?
So the way that the old joke goes is someone would say, how did Moses make his coffee? Or how did Abraham make his coffee? Or whoever you add in there. And then the answer to the joke is he brews it, which is funny because the Hebrews, right?
Yeah.
I hate that joke because I've heard it so many times.
And I never heard it. So,
but we were covering some of the anachronisms in Genesis, so I made up my own joke where I say, "Hey, how does Moses make his coffee?" And then you were supposed to say he brews it, but you didn't know the answer to the joke, so then I had to finish it for you because the real answer was you're going to say he brews it, and then I'm going to say, "No, actually, that's pretty anachronistic. They didn't have coffee at the time of Moses."
Okay.
Yeah. But anachronisms are no problem for Genesis. Anyway, so the long and the short of it was the joke failed because you didn't know the originating joke.
Right, yeah.
Which should go to tell you never assume that somebody knows the answer to a joke, even if it is a very common joke.
Very common joke.
That's like knock knock.
Oh, who's there?
Orange. Knock knock.
Who's there?
Orange.
Orange who?
Knock knock.
I'm not gonna answer the door much longer. Who's there?
Orange.
Orange who?
Orange, you glad this is the last time I said knock knock joke?
Well, I would have been more glad if it was 3 knock knocks ago, but
something like that. Anyways,
let's try to keep our jokes to biblical ones.
Maybe we're not comedians.
Well, I'm a comedian.
You are funny.
Yeah, you're the straight man.
I think you're actually correct there. I'm the straight guy.
You're Abbott, and I'm.
Since I don't know who that is, I'm going to take your word for it.
No, I'm Abbott. You're Costello.
Sure.
All right, let's do this. That was way too much. My sister is probably like, "Are they going to get on with it?" So we'll just cut all that out. Actually, to be honest.
Yeah, good thing it's live, and we can't cut anything out.
Yeah.
Verse 9.
Verse 9. And he said to his people, "Look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we." I keep forgetting that it's not actually italicized. You know?
I like that the New King James Version included the difficult rendering where it says, "Look, the people of the children of Israel." It's kind of a convoluted way of saying it, but that's actually what's in the text.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out what it meant. Is he saying the children of Jacob? Because that seems unlikely, considering barely anyone knew who Jacob was. Therefore, why would it be a child of Israel if the country hadn't even existed yet? Or is this another anachronism? I don't know.
It's not an anachronism. It's just a funny way of wording it. My translation smoothed it out.
Probably
It's
should have checked the message. But
the NRSV, done by actual biblical scholars. And it says, look, the Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we, which is a pretty good gloss. But the New King James did actually say it correctly. It said, look, well, it probably says behold in Hebrew, hine, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we.
All right. Hold on for a second. I'm going to get mine out here.
Oh, you're getting the message out?
Best translation there is.
I would throw it out into the trash if it wasn't on your phone.
All right. He spoke to his people with alarm. There are way too many of these Israelites for us to handle.
That's not at all what he said.
I mean, it sounded like what you said.
Not even close.
All right. So, yeah, so that's what it meant. Wait, what did it mean?
I don't know.
I thought you were telling me what it meant.
Well, it just means that there's a bunch of them. Look, there's a bunch of Israelites now.
The people of the children
stronger than
of
us.
Israel. The people of the children of Israel. Okay. I wonder if that's how they said it for real.
Yeah, that's actually is what is in the Hebrew text.
Look, the people of the children of Israel.
Yeah. It's just sometimes in Hebrew they have some intuitive ways of wording sentences. And some translations will smooth it out, and some translations are like, "No, we're going to keep that. We're just going to let the reader deal with it."
Right.
That's one of the reasons why I like the New King James Version.
Those are my least favorite translations.
That's literally my favorite. That's why you know what's actually being said.
Message is pretty good. All right.
I don't trust every translation, you know?
Well, neither do I.
I know. That's why you read the message. So you can have the worst of them. And
that's exactly it.
Anyways, I don't know if I didn't have a note on this particular verse.
It was just confusing how it was worded.
I gotcha. Yeah. So we can move on to verse 10 then.
Sure can.
Okay.
Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in the event of war, that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land. That seems very realistic. Like that would ever happen. It sounds like the king's just trying to find something for the Egyptians to get upset about. You know, I mean, I don't know if this is true, but it feels like maybe there was some other stuff going on in Egypt, and the king needed a diversion, needed a scapegoat. You know,
right?
Like immigrants or what have you.
Well, I had a theory because
and these were immigrants.
They were, yes, they literally were immigrants, and remember, probably for the most part, they were still relegated to Goshen, right? But I had an interesting theory. And you know, it's just a theory, but I was confused because it says, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they increase and in the event of war join our enemies, which is a fair concern that they'll join the enemies if they go to war, which the Egyptians and the Nubians go to war all the time in history. But then he says, and escape from our land. That's the part that was weird. I'm like, wait. They're just, immigrant sojourners. Why do they care if they leave?
Is it so go up out of the land, or is it actually escape? That feels like it matters.
It's the same, actually, to go up out.
See, message says, or just walk off and leave us. So
that is what it means to escape somewhere.
Yeah, but escaping means you were like captured or something, you know?
Well, no, when you're captured, you're literally doing the opposite of escaping. You're being captured.
Yeah, but after you're captured, you'd escape.
Well,
you don't escape when you haven't been captured.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say. It doesn't make sense in verse 10 that the Egyptians would be scared that they would leave. Why do they care if they leave?
Oh, yeah, because they kind of want them to leave?
Well, maybe, but they're not slaves yet. Right. So what value are they adding to Egyptian society at this point that they're afraid that they would leave? Are they just like cheap labor? Is this kind of like all of the immigrants that work the farms in the South?
Mm.
One day we just decide that we're not going to have any of them. That would be a problem.
So they don't want to get rid of them, but they also don't want them to stay as equals who could rise up.
Yeah, that seems to be the problem. Is I think that like they need them for something,
Mm-hmm.
but also they're like, well, they're getting more numerous.
Mm-hmm.
We got to do something about this, right?
Yeah.
They must have relied on them after 400 years or 300 years, however long it's been so far.
Mm-hmm.
They must have developed some sort of reliance upon this large population group.
Right.
Even if it was just building projects. Maybe they were working the fields and building projects for cheap labor. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
They must have been contributing enough that they were afraid that they would lose some source of something.
Right.
Yeah,
I get that.
So that was the only thing I wanted to say about that. It took me. I read that a few times before I kind of came up with any ideas of like, well, how can you worry about escape if they're not slaves yet?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? They're about to be slaves, but I think they're just afraid.
Maybe that's why they're about to be slaves, so they can have their cake and eat it too.
I think so.
And have their slaves and make sure they don't run off
and eat them too.
And eat them. Right.
Mm-hmm. Terrible. Yeah, so I don't know, that's what I was thinking about that. Let's read 11 through 13.
All right. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to inflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were in dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor.
Such a good King James / New King James word.
Yeah.
Rigor.
So I guess that just means they worked them pretty hard.
Yeah. Yeah. My translation doesn't use nearly as fun of a word.
Okay.
Mine just says the Egyptians became ruthless in imposing tasks on the Israelites.
Isn't your translation my translation?
And made their lives bitter with hard service. Anyways, no, I'm reading the NRSV right now just for comparison.
Then I'll read the Message for comparison.
Except that's not really a translation. That's just a garbage piece of poetry.
Okay.
The NRSV and the NASB and the NIV and the New King James, these are all translations.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not going to have this discussion because we've already had it 500 times over the last 10 years or so.
Uh-huh. All right.
Over the last decade, we've known each other. How many times have we talked about the Message?
Probably a lot.
At least 100 times.
Yeah. I like it and you hate it.
I know
about that. All right.
Anyways, so they build the storehouses.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any notes on that?
Just talking about the word rigor.
Oh,
rigor. That was it.
Oh, okay.
I was going to tell you what the Message had for the translation, but I'm not going to do that now.
But now I want to know.
Okay. It says that the Egyptians decided to treat them worse than ever. So, with rigor.
Fair enough.
I thought that helped me, though,
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah. That was my little brain.
The only note that I had written for this section was just kind of like, just note for people reading the Bible, the topic's going to come up that there's some sort of an anachronistic feature with the timeline here. If we assume that the Israelites built the storehouses of Pithom and Ramses, there's a little bit of a problem only in that the chronology's off, because in 1 Kings chapter 6, it says this. Oh, that's in Hebrew. Let me get it in English. I don't know why I pulled it up in in Hebrew. But now I've got 10 windows open. Get rid of some. All right, 1 Kings chapter 6. We want verse 1. It says in the 480th year after the Israelites came out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, he began to build the house of the Lord. So basically, what's being said here is from the time Solomon started building the temple to the time that they left Egypt, there was 480 years. And this can't be an accurate number, only because if you do the math, in 970 Solomon started building the temple, and that brings you all the way back to like 1445, the Exodus. But that would mean that the Exodus happened 200 years before the storehouses of Pithom's and Ramses was built.
Oh, we can't have that.
That obviously is off. So
Way off.
There's a lot of there's a lot of questions about like, well, who got what wrong? There really is no answer for it, but somebody got a number wrong somewhere. Now, I'm actually inclined to believe, from what we know about history and archaeology, that Ramses probably was the pharaoh who subjugated the Israelites, if there were any there. If the story has any truth in it. I think that makes sense of the Exodus, because shortly before the Exodus, the Canaanite lands were terrorized by a bunch of nomadic groups called the Habiru, and a lot of their kings got defeated, a lot of their cities got overturned, and the whole territory got thrown into disarray, which would be the perfect time for a bunch of Hebrews to leave Egypt and come into the land and start taking a foothold. And then in 1170, the whole region collapsed. Like whole people groups died out, which means the Israelites who would have been there just, 100 years ago could now infiltrate all the rest of the territory, now that it was not just in disarray, but a lot of people just either died or left.
Mm-hmm.
So I think from archaeology, the Exodus makes sense if we go with the Exodus narrative and ignore the Book of Kings and just assume the Book of Kings got a number mixed up somewhere.
I'm definitely ignoring it.
Yeah. I think it's more realistic to assume that when they're talking about the storehouses of Pithom's and Ramses, that the Exodus narrative is probably the more accurate retelling of the timeline.
Okay.
Only because that's where all the details are. The Book of Kings just kind of haphazardly gives a timeline, and I've seen other timelines in Kings that are wrong. So I think someone just got their numbers wrong. Or maybe 480 is a special number to somebody, and maybe it had a spiritual or some other significance, and maybe it wasn't meant to be a literal number. I don't really know. Right. That's all I had to say about that.
I never heard of 48 being spiritual, though.
Yeah, I don't think 400. I don't know anything about the number 480 being special.
Yeah. All right. So everything you just said, I don't need to know any of that. Right?
Guess not.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's continue.
Right. I only brought that up because the chronology of the Exodus comes up a lot when people talk about it.
Do you think that, you know how there's these biblical inerrantists?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there is a timeline that brings everything together coherently?
There's not.
It's not possible?
At some point, you have to exclude somebody's information to make it all fit. Because there's contradictory information. The Book of Kings cannot be numerically correct if we also assume that they built the storehouses of Pithom and Ramses, which were built while Ramses was king. And we know there were some other places that were built near Pithom's and Ramses before the reign. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't say that they built the storehouses that would later be torn down and then rebuilt as other storehouses. The text is pretty clear, I think. And why does it keep mentioning Ramses unless he was the prominent pharaoh of the time?
Right.
You know what I mean? There's other reasons why I would say that Exodus and Genesis are indicating Ramses was the pharaoh here.
Well, you said that they probably might have used Ramses just because this was written a long time after the events, right? And that was probably the most popular pharaoh they could remember.
Yeah, so that is one theory, that it was at a time period before Ramses.
Mm-hmm.
But when it was written hundreds of years later, the most prominent pharaoh that they could think of was Ramses, and so he kind of his legacy carried on so strongly that he
Right.
kind of got inserted into the text, and that's fine too. You can go that route. You just have to, like I said before, you have to exclude somebody's information. So you can say that yes, there were 480 years before the building of the temple, and that puts the Exodus in the middle of the 1400s.
Mm.
But if that's the case, then we do have to exclude Ramses from being the actual pharaoh at the time. But that does fit an alternative hypothesis, which is that the population of the Hyksos people, that those are somehow synonymous with the Hebrew people, because there were a bunch of Semitic speaking people called the Hyksos
Mm-hmm.
that took a hold in Egypt for a while. In fact, they grew so numerous that they actually took over kingship in Egypt for a little bit before they were forced out. But they were first forced out in a bloody battle.
Oh,
Like they went to war with the Egyptians.
so no slavery and what?
Right. The expulsion of the Hyksos, it could overlap with the Exodus timeline somewhere. It's not exact, it's not precise, but it's possible. If you trust the number from the Book of Kings, then it's possible you can match it up with the Hyksos expulsion. However, if we say that they left during the reigns of Ramses or shortly after Ramses, the Hyksos were already gone at that point. So you can't line it up with the Hyksos expulsion. You have to say that there was some sort of Exodus event.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, not today, but we should really discuss those Hyksoses. Because they sound a lot like the early Israelites, you know?
Right.
I'm just saying there's a lot of coincidences.
Well, they were Hebrew. I mean, not Hebrew. They were Semitic. They were from the same
Right.
generic genetic subgroup that the Hebrews were from.
Right. So maybe they were the Israel.
It's possible. Maybe we can explore some of that next week. We'll do a little bit on the Hyksos people.
All right.
Okay.
I'll have to come here at 6 then.
Yeah, well, sure. We'll just go for 5 hours next week. It's fine. What do we got next? Verse 14.
And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and brick, and in all manner of service in the field. That's like 2 kinds of manner of service.
Yeah.
That's a lot of manner going on. What do you want?
So there's a couple things, like it says they made their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and so on and so forth, right?
Mm-hmm.
They basically enslaved them.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the question. Okay, if they were afraid that they would leave and then they decide to make them slaves, what was preventing them from just leaving? Like once Egypt started saying, "Hey, we're just going to enslave you guys."
I mean, it had to have been a pretty quick thing, because, I mean, otherwise they would have left. But, you know, this is where they've lived their entire lives, right?
Well, that's the thing is, it is a country.
What?
Egypt is a country, right?
Right.
There's not like a giant wall around it.
Right.
I mean, other than fear and maybe war.
Okay.
I mean, do you think some people left anyways?
I do not know.
I bet some did. In fact, because later on in the narrative, remember, I think in chapter 4, when God is speaking to Moses, and Moses is like, "Yeah, I stutter, don't send me." And then God goes, "No, your brother Aaron is coming to you. He'll speak for you." Well, wait a minute. What? Aaron's supposed to be a slave in Egypt, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if Aaron can just walk away
Right.
and just leave, just like that.
Well, maybe it was like that time in Nazi Germany where the Jews were like, I can tell something's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them tried to get out early. But of course, a lot of them couldn't.
That was my thought. My thought is when the Egyptians began to crack down and enslave some of these Hebrews, I bet some of them left.
Mm.
You know what I mean? I bet some of them already left. Where they ended up is hard to say. But I mean, Moses escaped too. Moses just left. after what we'll read later.
I mean, his story is a little different, isn't it?
Right, but nobody stopped him, is what
Well,
I'm saying.
right.
Which makes you wonder.
But I mean, back in the day, if you do something bad and you'd like go 50 miles away, nobody will ever find you, right? I mean,
Right, well, my point is, though, to what level were they slaves? I have a theory.
okay.
I don't know if they were necessary slaves, like what we would depict it, like in like the antebellum South, where like people were carried around in chains and shackles, and like
Mhm.
everybody had their own individual master. I don't know if that's technically what happened.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was more like um, group labor under the threat of war, meaning they're like, listen, you guys are going to work for the Egyptian government. There will be taskmasters at the job location, and we might even send officers to your house if we notice people aren't showing up.
Mm.
But it seems more like forced labor than individual ownership.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think that's what I had already thought.
Right. So if it's more of a forced labor under the fear of not going to war, then it makes sense that some people like Moses and Aaron can flee without getting, unalived.
Mm.
Although a lot of them stayed because they're like, well, I mean, still getting fed every day. The work kind of sucks, but we're still living in our homes. I'm still living in the home of my ancestor.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? My great grandfather built this home.
Right.
So it might have been somewhere in between, like the Atlantic slave trade and going to work. Some middle ground between there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like that.
With the level of work getting progressively worse over time, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like the old analogy about the frog boiling in the pot. Well,
right, yeah.
If you turn the heat up slow enough, the frog doesn't know he's getting boiled.
Yeah, I get that.
I'm curious if there was a little bit of that going on.
And then eventually they turn around and they're slaves.
Basically, that's kind of my thought.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, that's all I had to say about that.
Sweet. I had nothing to say on that.
Cool. Let's move on to the next section.
Right.
I think it was 15 through 16.
Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew woman and see them on the birth stools, then she shall live.
Pretty drastic measures.
So the Hebrews just had 2 midwives.
Oh no,
That
no.
was it.
No, they definitely had more.
And these 2 were just responsible for the babies left and right. You'd have to schedule an appointment with them.
I assume there were only 2. I mean, there was only 2 named, but there were more.
Were these like the head midwives?
That's my thought, right? Because the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives. So it doesn't say how many, but he does then speak to 2 of them specifically. It says, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah and the name of the other was Puah.
It's just odd to get actual names,
but
especially for women.
I know, right? But
and
you're
I
right.
assume they don't come back ever again in the Bible.
Right. Well, there's a couple things. I assume that these were like spokeswomen of the other midwives.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know in ancient Egypt, the midwife was an actual profession.
Okay.
Just like being what we would call a doctor, like an ancient Egyptian doctor, that was a profession.
Okay.
It wasn't like in the Canaanite region where somebody just decided they were going to be a healer and go sit by a tree and wait for people to come to them. This was like an actual career that people were typically born into. So my guess is that the midwives were like the head midwives. And if that's true, that would explain why their names are actually given, is because they were probably well known. They were probably like the leaders of the midwives, which by tradition were always women. Men were not. Yeah, the men were not permitted to give birth
Okay. Oh,
because the birthing process and even the menstrual process was unclean,
right.
and men wanted nothing to do with that. And to be fair, they still don't.
Oh,
I mean, nothing's changed in thousands of years. Men are at the foot of the birthing bed and not, or the head of the birthing bed, not the foot typically. People like men who wanted to watch it come out are usually deemed as being a little strange.
Mm.
I don't want to watch nothing come out. Nope, no thank you. So anyways, I think that's why there's only 2 of them listed, but I think they were supposed to relay that to the others.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if he knew their names as much as the author knew their names. The king could have just told one of his attendants, like, "Hey, go find the lead Hebrew midwives and bring them to me."
Oh.
Well, because the Hebrews kept track of their lineage. If you go to the Book of Chronicles, you'll even see names of people that were born in Egypt. Right, so there's definitely the Hebrews definitely have an emphasis on keeping track of who's who in their history. I assume it's it. Now, if not, it's possible that these 2 ladies are just given names that were significant to like their role in the story. I mean, we could probably do it right now. I gotta be honest. I kind of assume that you would because you always do.
Yeah. I didn't.
So the name here's what we've got. The name of the first one, Shifra, doesn't really say, but the name of the second one, Puah, is a Canaanite name which means lass or little girl. Why wouldn't it says? Let's see. Yeah, there seems to be some. They're not really clear about what the name of the first girl is. I'll just read it for you. It says the name Shifra is found in a list of slaves in Egypt during the Sobektepe the third, during the reign of Sobektepe the third at 1745. This list is on the Papyrus Brooklyn 35.1446 in the Brooklyn Museum. The museum states that scholars assume that this is a hieroglyphic transliteration of the Hebrew name Shifra. The name means to be fair or to be beautiful and may be related to or even the same name as the Aramaic Sapphira, and up to the slight morphological adaptations the same as Shifra, the name of the Hebrew midwife. So basically, it seems like what they're suggesting is that her name is related to being beautiful or fair. Doesn't have anything to do with the story. Although the name Pua seems to, if the name means little girl, because the little girls were the only children that were allowed to survive. Right? But yeah, how many midwives were there? I have to assume there was a bunch. Yeah. I meant to look up. Oh, excuse me. My goodness. I meant to look up the birthing stools and have a picture of it ready for the clip, but you can look up ancient Egyptian birthing stools. They didn't give birth like we do it today. That they were squatters, just like just like the apes, the ape families give birth. They don't give birth on their backs. That's something we invented with like the modern medical system. That's what they say. And that's how they did it in the ancient world. In fact, in some places in the world, they still do it that way. You just hop a squat, as they say. Just make sure you got something to wipe with or somewhere to wash. It still baffles me that people for millennia had no toilet paper. Well, see, that was my thought. is if you have trees, you can find leaves. Just make sure you don't wipe with something poisonous.
Right.
But what if you live in a climate where it gets cold in the winter and there's no leaves? What do you use then? I don't know either.
Probably see-
Oh. Anyways, I
you
just
get the
yeah, there's
nice.
some modern luxuries
Yeah.
that I just feel like you don't think about, but they are so essential to life. I just can't imagine going without toilet paper. I can't do it. Anyways, let's read on.
17. I see what.
Right, yeah, because they're killing all the baby boys. Up the creek without a paddle. One of the things, and I mentioned it on a later note too. Here's the thing: the Pharaoh asked the Hebrew midwives to execute the Hebrew baby boys. Right? Did he really think that was a thing? Like, come on, guy. I even if these were Egyptian midwives, do we really think Egyptian midwives are going to be murdering baby boys from the Hebrews? It still seems unlikely. It seems like really bad planning. This part of the narrative boggles the mind because I'm like, either the king's dumb or there's some missing information. Maybe his head is so big because remember a lot of the Egyptians thought that they were like descendants or mixed gods or they thought they were divine. If it is his head so big that he thinks merely telling a Hebrew to commit murder is enough for them to commit murder. I just noticed that your microphone's not doing anything. Right now it's not.
Testing.
It was working. No. No. Did it come unplugged? The power light is on. I know. Unplug it and plug it back in real quick. The cord in the bottom of it? Or just break it. That's fine too. That's unfortunate because that means nobody heard what you're saying. That would be true. We're definitely not doing that. Test your microphone.
Testing.
We got nothing out of that mic. That's my mic. Let me see if it showed up now. I wonder if it is the cable. The good news is my mic probably did actually pick you up. The bad news is I don't know why. I don't see it in here, which is odd to me. All right, talk in your mic again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't hear anything. It's so odd. Well, the problem's not your microphone. The problem is the configuration of our audio devices. and the fact that this computer, for some reason, decided that even after we got your microphone working, it was just going to turn it off, which is kind of a weird thing, to be honest. Doesn't usually do that kind of thing. I mean, computers don't usually just decide we're going to turn your microphone off. Mm-hmm. But yeah, now it's completely quit. So that being the case, let me reroute the cable real quick. I've got 2 cables because that is far away from the computer. Let me take 1 cable out of the equation. Well, I mean, we've had issues, but we haven't had this issue.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
There we go. Your microphone's plugged in now. It must have been that extension cable. Try your mic.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Now we're back in action.
All right.
Okay, so I don't know, that mic extension must have, that cable, it's an old cable. I'd assumed it still worked. It must only sometimes work.
You know, you should only use Monster brand cables, right?
That's crazy. So let's go ahead then.
All right, let's start at what are we at? Number 1 then? We'll just start over.
Oh, no, we're definitely not going to start over. I think we're at 17.
All right. But the midwife. Wait, we did this one.
We almost did that one.
I thought we completely did it.
Not quite.
All right. So the king is like, "Hey, kill them," and the midwives didn't. And the king's like, "What the deal?" All right.
Yeah. You could just kind of read it though.
Fine. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this thing and saved the male children alive?"
Right. Yeah, this is kind of self-explanatory, is it not?
I believe so, yeah.
As we already stated, there's no reason for the Hebrew women to kill their own babies.
Testing.
Yeah, it's working now.
You think so, but my sister wrote, "I can't hear anything now."
Well, the stream might be lagged.
Lagged?
It might be lagging. Like, she might not be hearing what's happening just yet. Might have to give it a second.
All right.
Because you've got audio input on your mic right here. Like on the thing.
We should have like real-time captions.
What do you mean?
Real captions that translate what we say at the same time as we say them.
There is a way to do that, but I don't know if you could do that in real time.
No, they do it in Google Meets. Is that what's called, Google Meets?
Yeah, there might be like a plugin for it.
Yeah.
On
it's working now, she says.
Yeah, I figured it was probably okay. We're good to go. So, not much to say on verses 17 and 18.
Right.
As expected, the Hebrew women are like, yeah, we're not doing that.
Right.
And then verse 19, let's read that.
And the midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them." Yeah, they were just making an excuse. That makes sense.
Do you think the Pharaoh bought that excuse?
Only if he was an idiot.
That was my thought. It seems like a flimsy one.
My only job is to be there to help children give birth. Also, I miss every single birth because the babies are just too fast for us.
Right. Right.
All right, you need to find a different profession.
The question becomes, if this is the trend that the midwives just can't get there in time, then how are any of them doing their jobs ever?
Right.
Right?
Mhm.
You see what I'm saying? Not a good excuse.
No. They just had to think of something on the spot, I guess.
Listen, when your life is on the line,
Right. They'll say anything.
your brain just starts spitting things out.
Right.
Yeah.
I get that. Yeah.
Let's do verses 20 and 21.
Therefore, God dwelt well with the midwives. Oh, dealt well. That makes more sense. Therefore, God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very mighty. And so it was, because the midwives feared God, that he provided households for them.
Interesting, huh?
Yeah, God is like, hey, I'm going to give you your own babies now. I wasn't going to before, but now you ate.
That's kind of the weird thing, because it says so Pharaoh, whether he was or was not buying it is one thing, but God sees that what they're doing makes sense, and God's like, oh, I like that.
Hey, wait, God is rewarding them for lying.
Yes.
I only bring this up because I caught the tail end of in the market as I was driving here, and they were discussing when or if it was ever right to lie. And the answer was no. It was never right to lie.
Oh, it definitely is. I mean, in most moral frameworks, whether it's Christian or non-Christian, most people would say, you know, if you're committing a lesser crime in order to avert a greater crime,
Well, they were talking about the Nazis again,
sure,
and how some people hid Jewish people.
right?
And the Nazis would come knocking and say, hey, do you have any Jews hiding here? And the person on the radio said that you should not lie.
Stop.
Yeah. He said you could do other things. You could say, don't come in, you know, or.
They're going to come in.
Right. It was the craziest thing I'd ever heard.
Who said this?
So there's some guy who wrote a 1,200-page book on biblical ethics.
That's ridiculous. And he didn't bother to read the Bible?
I'm not making this up. Oh, he was reading the Bible.
Obviously didn't read this.
You know how it is. Cherry picking.
It's always cherry picking. I know. It's always cherry picking. Okay, so but that's insane.
Mm-hmm.
That's insane.
Mm-hmm.
God rewards trickery all the time in the Old Testament.
Oh yeah, definitely. Jacob.
All throughout the book of Judges.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Jael lies to get the leader, the commander of the army into her tent so she could drive a tent stake through his head. I mean,
and Abraham lied about his wife.
Yeah, Abraham lied. God told him to lie about his wife, didn't
he? Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
If I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure. Anyways, the long and short of it is like, even in a biblical framework, if you're trying to avoid a disaster of some nature or murder or whatever, it seems perfectly permissible for you to commit something like what we would call like a white lie.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be crazy not to allow such a thing, unless you're just a really strict proponent of like Calvinism. You're like a hyper Calvinist where everything that ever happens only happens because it's in the will of God. Well, if that's the case, then, but why do anything? You see what I'm saying? Like, what's your point? So I don't know, man. I don't know. I've never listened to the radio show you're referring to, but that's a crazy viewpoint.
I put it on every time before I get over here just so I can get riled up.
You must really like these guys.
I definitely do not.
Oh boy. Well, I've never listened to that radio program, but now I don't want to.
That works.
Anyways, so God rewards the Hebrew midwives for being tricksters, which is common throughout the Bible. I remember Jacob was a trickster. He was rewarded.
Yep.
Not necessarily for his being a trickster, but at least in spite of it. Or in spite of it. So that's that. But the funny thing is about this verse is it says that he gave them households.
Yeah.
Was he not going to already do that?
I mean, that's clearly what it suggests, right?
Right? Isn't that kind of what it...
Yeah.
If God didn't provide them households, or we assume children, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that would be seen as a curse typically,
Right.
right? Women who couldn't
Closing up their womb.
exactly, yeah, women who couldn't reproduce had some sort of a problem with God. We had discussed this earlier in the baby wars of Jacob's wives.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's really there's some questions there, right? I don't know. Let's read 22.
So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. Aha! And that's just what happened to Moses. Look how the whole story just comes around like that.
Right. So there's some things happening here, but do you notice the second time around he gives the command to all of his people, not to the Hebrews?
Yeah, it's probably a good idea.
It's like I think he learned his lesson.
So, I was kind of wondering if the Pharaoh meant that they should place them in the river without a basket. They probably should have clarified on that one. You know what I mean?
Well, I think if you follow the arc of the story, the point is to give them a baptism that you don't recover from.
A baptism that you don't recover from. Boy, that's a good name for a book.
You know,
right
where
there.
you hold someone's head underwater until they stop breathing.
Oh.
Remember that's how the Catholic Church used to murder all the Anabaptists?
Why would I remember this?
Oh, yeah. In a great twist of irony during the Reformation period, the Anabaptists, the ones that were getting rebaptized as adults in an act of rebellion against the Catholic Church because they baptized as infants, they would send people to the final baptism where they would take them to a river and drown them in the river.
I guess that makes sense, though. Kind of, I guess the idea is that they become Christians and then they die and they go to heaven, right?
Well, that wasn't why they were doing it. They were doing it because it was sadistic and ironic at the same time.
Oh.
But they did do that when the Spanish conquistadors went through and started defeating groups of people.
The Inquisition?
No, that's different.
Oh.
The conquistadors were like military invaders. They would go in and they would like mass baptize entire populations and then kill them all.
That's what I'm saying. That's what this sounded like.
That's not what's happening here.
Okay.
The Egyptians don't know anything about baptism.
Okay.
That would be, they're just trying to kill the babies by drowning them all.
Okay.
Which, if we assume that the numbers are correct, that there was like 2 million of these people, it means I have to assume they killed many thousands of babies by throwing them into the river. At what point does the Nile River just kind of
run red with blood?
And that
or get stopped up?
Yeah, I say it empties into the Mediterranean, but you would think there's going to be like a dam of dead babies somewhere.
Oh, all right.
Because they float.
We can talk about anything other than this.
I said the babies float is what I'm saying.
Uh-huh.
Eventually, if you throw enough of them into the river,
yeah,
there's a dead baby dam.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know how. I don't know how many babies made it to the river. Is what I'm saying. There's some logistical questions.
Yeah, I mean, how many people would be that heartless to throw a baby in the river?
I'm inclined to believe that even the Egyptians were probably like, I don't know about that. I don't think that's the thing to do. In fact, I know Bob. Bob helped me put my roof on just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
I don't think I want to throw his baby in the river.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like, I think there's probably some interpersonal relationships there that ended up overcoming their desire to kill babies.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, the average person doesn't want to kill a baby.
I believe that.
Right? Even if you think that they're wicked. That's why, again, we're talking about the Holocaust. That's why the Holocaust is so much remembered as these people are just butchers. Not just because they killed adults, but babies, infants, children. Like, that seems to be, no matter how you justify war, that usually seems to be where normal people draw the line. Normal people are like, I don't know if we should just go around killing babies. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, that's about all I have to say about that.
Yeah.
it seems like a little bit of an oversight just to even tell the Egyptians, all of his people, to like, hey, go kill these babies. It might have been more effective if he had like a group of military officers and he sent out this group of military officers to go through the town and collect the babies and kill all of them.
Yeah.
Because then they have to do it. Because if they don't do it, they die.
Right.
Right? They're under charge. But if you just issue a blanket command to all of your people to do it,
Right.
you got to know a bunch of them aren't going to do it. I don't know. Somebody's getting hidden in the floorboards.
Right. Yeah. But you can't lie about it.
Just not Moses.
Not Moses.
Anyways, with that, maybe we should jump into chapter 2.
Yay. We're doing 2 chapters.
And good thing there's even more material in chapter 2 than there was in chapter 1, and we'll just be here till midnight.
I will
speak
more quickly.
With that, let's read verses 1 and 2.
All right. And a man of the house of Levi went and took as wife a daughter of Levi. So the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. I'm glad Moses was a looker, because otherwise who knows what would have happened, huh? Like, this baby's ugly, forget it. Forget it. I'll wait for a pretty one.
Right, that's the weird thing, because it's kind of like, wait, what? Why the side comment that the child was like fine or fair?
It almost sounds like just one of those tropes where the good people are cast as beautiful. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like this is probably the author a long time later mentioning that, you know.
There's a side note though. Remember the midwife whose name seemed to be related to being beautiful or fair?
Yeah.
It was Shifra or Shifaru or
I think it was Shiparu. What's up?
Something like that. The word here that we have for Moses being fair is actually pretty well related. It's the root word of sov or siv, depending on what you want to do with the middle vowel, which seems to be somewhat related. I don't know if there was an intentional pairing between using that Hebrew word and the name of the midwife.
Why you think that the midwife was his mother?
Well, I don't know if that's true. I'm just saying that it's an interesting thing.
Mm-hmm.
That because there are other ways to call somebody fair.
Okay.
Let me read it. Hold on. Let me look closer. The screen is small.
Okay.
My text says a fine baby. The Hebrew word, which I can barely make out from here. Oh no, it's not a samek. It's not. It's a different word. It's tov. It just means good. Okay, the Hebrew word tov. I actually need to make my text bigger because I can only read some of these letters. And the samek and the tob in my particular text
glasses
look very similar, minus the dangler. So anyways, it just means that the baby was good, fine, healthy, beautiful, fair. There's a lot of ways to translate the Hebrew word tov.
Yeah, I'm looking it up here.
On the message?
Yep.
Might as well. Yep.
She saw that there was something special about it. Huh?
That matches.
You
could translate tov to special.
Okay, then we did it.
Yeah.
This kind of vindicates the message, doesn't it?
Well, it doesn't at all. But that's okay. You can still use it.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah, but to your point though, not to distract from your point, like, does it matter?
Right.
What's the point? My base assumption here is that it says that the woman conceived and bore a son, and that when she saw that the baby was good,
she decided not to kill it or something.
Well, see, that was my thought.
Okay. All right.
Is what if she gave birth to a baby that had like a defect,
right, or
was like subpar in some way, or was a runt? Maybe she would have been like, this is not the, if I'm going to hide a baby,
right? Yeah,
I'm going to make sure it's a healthy, good baby that I know is going to survive, because the infant mortality rate is already 50%.
Yeah.
if I'm going to keep one and risk my life, I'm going to keep a good one.
Mm,
I think that's what's happening
that
here.
makes sense too.
That's my gut feeling, you know.
Right.
Let's read verse 3.
But when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with asphalt and pitch, put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. I bet that was the cutest little ark ever. Imagine all the miniature animals that would fit inside it, you know?
Yeah, I often wonder, like, what was the shape of the vessel?
Yeah.
But it doesn't really say.
It says it's an ark.
Well, yeah.
Weird.
I mean, most translations just say basket.
Yeah, so I don't know why it says ark in this one.
But the translation of ark to me is kind of a fun one.
Okay.
And the only reason why I say that is because I think it goes back to, it kind of echoes the Babylonian story. And in the Babylonian story, I don't know if we've talked about this before. I'm going to read you a snippet from the legend of King Sargon.
Okay.
Okay. It says Sargon, the mighty king, the king of Agad or Agad or Agade. I don't know what the correct pronunciation is. It says, the king of Agade am I. My mother was a changeling and my father knew not. The brothers of my father loved the hills. My city was Azu Piranu, which is situated in the banks or on the banks of the Euphrates. My changeling mother conceived me in secret. She bore me. She set me in a basket of rushes or reeds with bitumen and sealed my lid. She cast me into the river which rose not over me. The river bore me up and carried me to Aki, the drawer of water. Aki, the drawer of water, lifted me out as he dipped his, and then the text is broken.
Mm-hmm.
And then it says, Aki, the drawer of water, took me as his son and raised me. And then the last line here says, Aki, the drawer of water, appointed me as his gardener. While I was gardener, Ishtar, that's an ancient Near Eastern deity, Ishtar granted me her love. And for 4 and then how many years, we don't know, he exercised kingship. It is about 40-something years he was king.
You know what? We actually went over this. It wasn't on the podcast, but I remember this.
So the narrative seems to be borrowing from the legend of Sargon. But the thing of it is, it's questionable if the two legends were borrowing from another legend. But here, using the word ark instead of basket, I think would be a dead giveaway that it was taken. The narrative was repurposed from a previous narrative.
Okay.
You know?
I don't know.
Because you wouldn't normally call the basket an ark.
Right.
But they used the word for ark, or at least a word that could be used to mean ark.
Yeah, the Message calls it a basket-boat.
Yes, a basket boat. Yes, I've seen something similar to that before. I've got the Hebrew Aramaic dictionary of the Old Testament. I'm gonna grab also the Brown Driver Briggs dictionary and see what it says. In the, let's see, this is the Hebrew Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament. It says, in the ancient Near East, a traditional vessel used by the hero of the deluge, which was a huge ship. It says it can also be a loan word from Egyptian that may be derived from meaning like a shrine or a sarcophagus or a chest, a storage chest. So there's a couple options there. The primary definition in the Hebrew Aramaic lexicon is a chest or an ark, which matches what your translation has. So it it's interesting that they use the word chest or ark in here when there were other words they could have used, but they chose to use those words. I don't know if it was because the narrative that they were either trying to mimic had those words in it, and they just carried over into the new version of the narrative. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or maybe when these events happen, the author was like, hey, there was another story just like this. Let's compare them. And he just happened to carry some over from that narrative. That's not to say that this didn't happen. You see what I'm saying? It's just saying that if it happened twice, it would be really the narrative when they wrote it the second time. It'd be hard for them not to know that there was a similar story already.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Nope. All right, let's continue.
Well, because in the Sargon narrative, it happened well before Moses.
Yeah. Right.
The Sargon narrative was written on clay tablets hundreds of years before. Right. So I only say that to say this: if something similar happened twice, the second time it happened, they probably knew about the first time, and they might have been on the forefront of their mind when they told that story.
I got you.
That's all I have to say about that.
All right.
All right. Verses 4 and 5.
And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down. Hi. Then the daughter of the Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. I had no comments on this.
I saw that. Well, you had one comment.
No, I didn't.
You did. Want me to read it?
No.
Not at all? It was definitely a very mature adult comment.
All right.
Right after it said the daughter of Pharaoh came to bathe in the river.
You know, my sister and wife are actually watching this right now. I know this for a fact.
I will not tell them that you put dirty notes.
Oh, boy.
And we won't read them.
That's great.
So his sister, Moses' sister, stood afar off to know what was going to happen to the boy. Obviously, that's fine. And then the daughter of Pharaoh came to bathe in the river, and I think we know what that means.
Yeah.
And then maybe we just read the next 2 verses or so, and we won't worry about the bathing part.
All right. And her maidens walked along the riverside, and when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." It's a Hebrew child because it cried? No, that's not it. Still, it's an odd way to say that, you know?
Right.
Did she know that this would be considered wrong and preemptively said that the baby was Hebrew so no one would gossip?
It's hard to say. My translation tried to smooth it over. And it says, when her attendants walked beside the river, she saw a basket among the reeds and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. This must be one of the Hebrews' children, she said.
That makes a lot more sense.
Right. Your translation is more literal. She probably did say something more akin to "this is one of the Hebrews' children."
Okay.
But she had to have known it was a Hebrew child.
Yeah, except when I was reading this, I thought Hebrew was Egyptian.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, your brain,
Yeah. That makes a lot more sense now.
Because Egyptian children aren't floating down the river.
Right.
I mean...
So it would have been obvious.
As far as I can tell, this is a trend.
Mm-hmm.
The only difference is this floating baby is in a basket rather than face down.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
It's a terrible thing to picture. It gets worse at the 11th chapter of Exodus.
Okay.
I mean, if you don't like baby murdering now, you're not going to like it in chapter 11 either.
We'll just skip over that.
Right. So, to the point, yes. She knew it was Hebrew because what else could it be, and why else? But I think this part of the narrative makes sense to me too, because who pulled the basket out of the water?
Let's see.
It was one of the attendants
Well,
of the daughter of Pharaoh, right?
She sent her maid to get it.
Right.
So the maid got the basket, but
right.
The daughter probably opened it, right?
Yeah, well, I'm saying the narrative here is really doing a good job of putting details into the story.
Okay.
Which is weird because chapter 1 seemed like it didn't have as much detail, but this to me is really realistic. If you're the Pharaoh's daughter, you're not just like reaching into the river to grab some Hebrew basket baby, right?
Right.
A sloppy storyteller could have just said that. Could have just said that Pharaoh's daughter pulled him out of the river.
Mm-hmm.
But no, the narrator actually gives it the realism. It's like, no. Pharaoh's daughter had a maid. That maid pulled it out. Because,
there must not have been too many of these babies in baskets being
no,
floating
I wouldn't
down.
think so. But that brings up a good point. Do you think Moses was the only baby put into a basket floated in the river?
That's what I'm saying. I mean,
because there might have been other women who are like, hey, you know what?
Yeah.
I'm not disobeying. I'm still putting the baby in the water.
Right.
Let's just pretend that I misunderstood the instructions.
I mean, obviously the baby's probably going to die, but maybe not.
But exactly, but maybe I'm doing what I'm told, but also rebelling and doing what I'm told, right? I'm inclined to believe there was more than one baby placed in a basket on that river. You know what I mean? It's just like if I was in that situation and I was like, well, I either put the baby in the river or I get killed by Pharaoh.
Right.
I'm like, well, maybe we'll put it in a nice little basket. Right. Who's gonna know?
Right.
And as long as they don't see me do it, if somebody finds that baby later, who's gonna know it was my baby?
Right.
Right? It's like an unpunishable crime.
Yeah. I believe that.
Maybe that's why this narrative is actually more believable than less believable, because there are probably hundreds of babies floating down that river in baskets, I bet, if I had to guess.
So she just randomly picked the one with Moses.
That's right. And where does the river flow to? It flows north. Where's Goshen? Goshen is south, on the south side of Egypt, which means those baskets are running north from Goshen up into Egypt proper, where the Egyptian women and people
take them, right?
Yeah,
that's
It's actually a really good idea. I can't assume that Moses' mom was the only one who did this,
right? Yeah,
especially knowing how much mothers love their
which makes
babies.
sense, because the way it looks in the Bible here, it almost seems normal. Because I guess I would have thought, the daughter of the Pharaoh would kind of get in trouble for.
Yeah, right. So if the daughter of the Pharaoh just randomly plucks out a Hebrew baby,
right?
But if you raise a Hebrew baby to be Egyptian,
right,
he's really not a threat. And to be fair, they probably can't even recognize the difference from a genetic standpoint, because I assume the Hebrews and the Egyptians did some interbreeding.
They probably looked very similar, right?
You would think so. Moses is called an Egyptian later on in the story. When he meets Jethro's daughters, they call him an Egyptian.
They couldn't tell the difference with Joseph, right?
Yeah, they couldn't tell the difference with Joseph. Even Joseph was first generation.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I bet there's a lot of babies floating down rivers.
Yeah.
That's my guess. Yeah, I'll buy it. I'll
buy it too.
What's the next verse?
7. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you?
I mean, that's just smart.
What?
I mean, Miriam, she's a genius.
Miriam? Who's that?
The sister of Moses?
Did it say that there yet?
It says then his sister, that's Moses' sister.
Well, I don't know her name.
Said to, it's Miriam.
Does it say that? Did I miss that?
No, I just know her name.
Okay.
I don't think her name showed up yet.
That's true. That's fine.
Well, I mean, I've read ahead.
I don't read it.
Well, I know. I've read the Bible before. You haven't. It's okay.
All right.
It says, his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call a nurse for you? So Moses' sister follows the basket.
Oh.
And then when it's picked out, she's like, and because she knows that
Yeah.
the Egyptian princess is like, oh, well, this is a Hebrew baby. So she follows her brother and I was like, hey, would you like me to find you a Hebrew woman to take care of this baby?
That is pretty smart.
That's
And
really
then
smart.
she gets his mother, right?
Yes, the boy's mother. Right? And a lot of people ask, well, how did Moses know he was Hebrew? Because he was raised by his sister and his mother.
Hmm.
And we'll that, I mean, that's in the next couple of verses. We'll see that he's not transferred until he's older. He's literally raised by his sister and his mother until he's like basically a young adult.
How old is that?
I don't really know. It doesn't say.
Hmm.
We'll get to that point though. It's going to come up here in a couple of verses. But yeah, I think the fact that he's got a genius sister that put him back in his own household really makes for a fun story.
Yeah, I read that, but I guess I didn't completely pick up on that.
That's okay.
That's okay?
Yeah, that's
Okay,
fine.
good.
Well, in verse 8 it says, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. And so the maiden went and called the child's mother, which is Moses' mama.
So what was his sister's occupation at this time? I mean, it feels like some random. Was she an adult? Just feels.
We're not told, but most likely not. She's probably close in age with Moses.
Well, it feels odd that you could just go up to the daughter of the Pharaoh, right? Wouldn't they have like armed guards all over the place?
Yeah, well, she was safe because they're only killing the baby boys.
Yes.
So the female Hebrews are safe.
Yes.
And again, I assume the Hebrews and the Egyptians do some level of mixing.
No, I mean, why can Miriam even come up to the Pharaoh's daughter?
Given that she's a slave.
Well, no, given that.
Well, she is though.
She's royalty.
Well, she's also a slave.
Who?
All the Hebrews.
Yes, but not Pharaoh's daughter.
No. Moses' sister would have been a slave or some sort of forced labor or something within.
Yeah, so how does she
Egypt.
get to talk to Pharaoh's daughter?
Or she could just incidentally be there.
Incidentally?
Yeah. You know?
It seems weird that you'd be able to talk to somebody like that, you know? I mean, that's a princess, right?
Well, yeah, but wouldn't you assume that if the princess had slaves or servants, that a number of them would have been Hebrews, the servant class?
I guess.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Kind of like even wealthy people in the South, almost all of them had, slaves even in the household, right? So it's possible that she had Hebrew slaves in the household already, and Miriam just kind of took advantage of this particular feature.
Just feel like, a princess would have like more guards than that. I don't know.
Maybe it's possible. Maybe she was a dope princess.
A what?
Maybe she was a princess of the people.
that was it.
I mean, she did rescue a Hebrew child.
She was like Jasmine. And
take it under her wing.
Yeah.
And she had pity on the Hebrew baby. Maybe she was a princess of the people. It's sad her name's never given, is it?
Didn't even know Miriam was a name.
But she's basically a hero.
Yeah, I get that.
I mean, let's just backtrack for a second. Okay.
Sure.
Without the princess, does anything in Exodus happen?
Well, no.
Because she could have found the baby and like, dunk it. Slam dunk it. T-bone it. Not T-bone it. Spike it. There you go. Like a football. Spike it. But she didn't do that. She had pity and compassion, and she basically rescued the entire Hebrew people, and they couldn't even give her name.
Right. They could give the midwife's name.
Yeah. Oh, they're Hebrew.
Oh, okay. So then maybe they didn't know her name.
Yeah. Justice for Pharaoh's daughter.
That's right.
Hashtag justice for Pharaoh's daughter.
We'll get that started.
It's unfortunate. There's a really good book on this, on all of the unnamed women in the Bible and how that trend appears in other ancient Near Eastern texts. and how women are kind of minimized in history.
Yeah,
I think it's called What's in a Name. It's a really good book. I haven't read it in like 10 or 12 or 13 years,
I'll put that on
but
my to read list.
definitely worth reading. Um, let's read verses 10 and 11.
And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called him his name Moses, saying, because I drew him out of the water. Now it came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown, that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So we already touched on this because I was, wondering how Moses even knew that he was Hebrew. But I guess if his mother and sister, I mean, they must have told him not to tell anybody, though. Right?
That's always been my thought was his mother and sister had to have told him because it says that they stayed with him until he grew up. And then in your translation, it says, after the child grew.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't really say how old he was when he was transferred, but it
Right.
seems to indicate that he was now a young adult.
Mm-hmm.
So if he spent his entire life being raised by the Hebrews, his own parents, kind of have to assume he knew.
Uh-huh.
He had to have known. Don't you think he'd ask, "Hey, how did I end up here?"
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think his sister would have blurted it out? Sisters and brothers tell each other things growing up
Mm-hmm.
that you can't keep secrets among siblings, can you? I don't know if you can.
So it says, and the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So I'd really like to know what age that would be. I would almost think that it could be just as soon as he was done nursing, because then she would be able to do all the things a mother could. And if that's the case, then he wouldn't really have much time to learn about his heritage, right?
It is possible that
Like, why would she say, I'll be his mother when he turns 15 or something? Doesn't make sense.
that's a good point. So at what point would the Pharaoh's daughter be expected, like if she paid somebody to raise the child,
Mm-hmm.
at what point would the child be kind of be turned over
Mm-hmm.
to be the child of the parent? And this I don't know because throughout history, the customs had been different. Because even think of like colonial and pre-colonial Great Britain or the UK, or Europe. You've seen what was that PBS show that was really popular about the wealthy people that owned the giant mansion and they had
Oh,
all
Kardashians.
no.
Oh, mm.
Think like World War II England.
I'm sure I don't know.
It was like super popular for like a decade on PBS.
This old house?
No, the show on PBS. We're gonna Google
Little
it real
House on
quick.
the Prairie?
No, 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 no,
Antique Roadshow?
no, 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 no,
Nova?
no.
What else was on PBS? The Gilded Age.
I thought it was PBS, wasn't it?
I don't know who you're talking about.
I swear, I know you've seen every episode.
What? Are you making this up now?
No, no, no.
Why would I? Okay.
Downton Abbey.
I haven't seen a single episode of that.
You telling me your wife didn't make you watch Downton Abbey?
We don't do that.
She's never seen it.
I'm pretty sure she has never seen an episode.
I want to call you a liar. There's no way she hasn't seen Downton Abbey.
I'll get her on the phone right now.
I got to be honest, that strikes me as a show that she would have watched like 2 or 3 times in a row.
I mean, where was it available?
I mean, on public television.
Yeah, but like in England, right?
Here.
I know. What? I'll look it up.
Like you didn't even have to have cable to get it.
No. This isn't an American show.
Well, I think it was an American show. It was just about a European setting, wasn't it?
No. It's a British drama series.
On what television show?
On what what?
On what network?
I don't know. My guess is PBS, since you're telling me this.
I thought it was a U.S. network.
I didn't think it was, though.
Well, I'm wrong.
Okay.
Because it says the country of origin is United Kingdom.
Okay.
So it's clearly not PBS.
Okay.
But what was it on? Maybe PBS was just syndicated. They had the rights to show it.
It's possible.
That makes sense.
I didn't know it was on PBS, though.
So it did start originally in the UK.
Did you see that?
See what?
It mentioned PBS there.
Oh, was it PBS? Where?
Scroll up. Right? Scroll up. There it is. It was the most watched television series on both ITV and PBS.
Oh, yeah. PBS. Yeah. I thought it was on PBS.
Okay.
It was like the only show PBS ever had that was a hit outside of like Reading Rainbow. Although Reading Rainbow was pretty dope.
Yeah.
But don't take my word for it.
Well, there you go.
So anyways, on Downton Abbey, they show like there's a custom that they still had even in Europe among wealthy aristocrats. That's a good show too. Aristocrats, where children would basically be raised by a nanny, and they really only kind of check in with the parents from time to time or show up at special functions.
I mean, that's similar to celebrities, right?
Yeah, it's not until they become young adults where they're proper, they've been educated,
right,
and they're ready to join the family as a contributing member.
Okay, yeah.
You know, so like those young adult years. I don't know what it was like in ancient Egypt, but I'm inclined to believe that if it was from a princess, it needed to be at a time in which the child was out of the way of what was happening.
I get it.
Or they couldn't cause a menace.
So no changing of diapers.
Right. But maybe still young enough that Pharaoh's daughter still felt like it was a child.
Right.
But I don't know at what age that is.
That was probably, it feels like 7 or 8.
It could be, but here's the funny thing. This is what makes it difficult.
All right.
This is why I'm torn. Is because what does Pharaoh's daughter do when she takes the child? It says Pharaoh's daughter, he was brought to Pharaoh's daughter and he became her son. So she called his name Moses. So she renamed him.
Oh.
How confusing would that be if he got now? As we have already seen from the Bible, people getting renamed is nothing. It happens all the time. But I'm just saying.
I wonder what his original name was.
Well, I don't know.
Okay.
But nevertheless, like what would be an appropriate age to rename somebody through adoption? Because if you do it too late in life, you just get used to having two names probably.
Probably like 3.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's my guess.
Anyways, I think there's some question marks on when Moses was transferred.
Yeah.
Because if you assume that he was transferred young, then verse 10 makes more sense. Because verse 10, let me find it. Verse 11 says, "Now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown." But that's confusing because it said the same thing in verse 10, and the child grew.
Right.
So it had to have happened before Moses was grown. You see what I'm saying? But I don't know if we could say he was still a baby.
Yeah, it's hard to tell because, I mean, this is Moses. He had to be pretty jacked to be able to just kill an Egyptian, right?
Right.
I mean, he probably wasn't like 16.
Right, but it does tell you that this happened after he had grown. Right, so there's 2 phases of growing.
But they use the same word.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's like I said, it's just hard to know what exactly the age would have been. But I don't think he was a baby.
Right.
That's just my 2 cents on the whole thing. Let's read verse 12. Or did we read 10 and 11?
Yeah, we did.
Okay. Yeah, let's do 12.
So he looked this way and that way, And when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. I love how this is worded. He was being sneaky, huh? I'm going to kill this guy, but first let me look left and right to make sure nobody's looking.
Isn't it funny what details they decide to include and then which ones they don't?
Mm-hmm.
It's odd.
So he just hid the body in the sand.
Right.
We got a full-grown adult getting buried in the sand, and they'll never be found.
I mean, it's not.
Is that believable? Is that how that works?
I think it is. Yeah, it doesn't take long to build dig a hole in the sand.
Okay.
I mean, as a kid, you probably dug holes in the beach.
Right.
Wouldn't be hard to, as a grown adult male, to dig a hole in the sand and throw a body in it and hope that decomposes quickly. And then by the time someone discovers it, if they do discover it, they're not going to know it's you.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It has to be a shallow grave at the least. But that's about it.
Yeah. You scroll up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You got anything on that?
No, that's about it. I was just looking up the Hebrew word that was used for grow up.
Okay.
And I was seeing if they used two different words.
Okay.
The word that they used in verse 11, I know it's gadol, which means to like grow or to increase or to become great. And I was going to look up the other one, but my mouse keeps dying for some reason. There we go. And let me see what it says here for grow up. Yeah, same word. So doesn't
not helpful.
Yeah, it doesn't give any clarity. Okay, so Moses kills the Egyptian.
That he does.
I only had one thing to say about this.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that he killed the Egyptian for what the Egyptian was doing indicates that he must have had some sort of a deep-seated connection with his kinfolk.
Yeah.
Which would lead me to believe not just that he knew he was Hebrew, he probably knew for a while.
Well, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
This is probably just building up in him.
Yes, I think it'd been building up for a while. He probably known since he was a young man.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe before he was even transferred, I assume, to the Pharaoh's daughter. So I think we have a lot of good reason to believe that Moses knew he was a Hebrew for probably quite a while.
Yeah.
Or else, what reason would he give for killing an Egyptian?
Mm-hmm.
You know? You're like, well, it happens. They're slaves. What can you do? But when you're tied to your own kinfolk,
yeah,
you're willing to risk your life, and he was risking his life there, even though he did look to the left and to the right.
Yeah.
Well, want to read 13 and 14?
You know, who would have been beating the Hebrew gentleman?
I assume a taskmaster.
And those guys are pretty jacked, right?
I don't know if they were. I mean, we don't know what type of regiment they had, but I mean,
I'm just thinking about like a guy with a big whip or something.
They had weapons, you know that.
Like a whip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what they had. I'm just saying that they had some kind of weapon.
Moses was so sure he could take him.
I mean, apparently Moses thought he was like a badass or something, because you wouldn't just take on any random Egyptian,
right?
Unless you were pretty tough,
right? So he must.
But he seems tough. Like if you read the subsequent verses about what happens with Jethro's daughters.
And did I read that?
I assume you did. I read it.
Then I must have.
It's coming up here in the next couple of verses.
Then I remember it.
Let's read 13, 14.
And when he went out a second day, behold, 2 Hebrew men were fighting, and he said to the one who did the wrong, "Why are you striking your companion?" Then he said, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Oh, snap.
Right?
I don't know if I would have been so flippant when talking to a murderer, though. I mean, Moses could have just murdered them, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Well, that's the other thing too, which really makes you wonder what the relationship was of the Hebrews here, because if they were truly slaves, um, he would have been worried about saying that to
That's true.
Pharaoh's daughter's child. I mean, that'd get you killed real fast,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Unless it was more likely that they were tasked with hard laborers as opposed to being slaves in the proper
Right.
sense.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that makes more sense of that. But yeah, there's no good reason to be that flippant to somebody that could end your life.
Right.
Especially if he killed his own Egyptian, they don't know he's Hebrew. How do they know that he won't fly off the handle and kill multiple Hebrews for talking out like that?
Yeah, I mean, I assume Egyptian life was valued a little more highly.
You would think.
And if you're going to go ahead and kill an Egyptian, you probably aren't going to think twice about killing a Hebrew, right?
Mm-hmm.
They didn't seem to care.
Right. What are you going to do? Fight back? If you kill the princess's son, all hell's going to break loose on your community. Pharaoh's daughter is going to get the king's guards. They're going to come down. They're going to be executing Hebrews left and right. So, I mean, what they said was pretty damn ballsy.
Yeah. Unbelievably ballsy.
Really? Yeah. It makes you wonder what was going on in their head, you know?
Yeah. Or really more what the relationship Moses actually had was with everybody.
Right.
I mean, you know, I've seen the movies and, you know, he's on a horse looking like a badass, you know? I'm like, I wonder if that's really what he would have been like, you know?
Or maybe the relationship between the Hebrews and the Egyptians were not as barbaric as we might picture. And maybe maybe they knew he was a Hebrew. Maybe it wasn't problematic for him and even his household to know that he was Hebrew. And this does line up with history.
Because they've taken Hebrews and raised them Egyptian.
Yeah.
And then they sent them back out, right?
Exactly, yeah.
To be rulers over them. Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
That was very common during this time period. That's how you ended up with so much hegemony in the Levant region and in Egypt, was because all of these Canaanite kings were raised and educated in Egypt and then sent back to their cities.
Yeah.
So was it really a problem to know that this Hebrew man was raised in the palace? Probably not. Probably not. Did they know that he was one of the babies that was supposed to die in the Nile? Probably not. They probably didn't do that math. You know what I mean? They probably forgot about it. You know, you just forget about that after a certain amount of time. They didn't know how old he was, probably. Right. Only Pharaoh's daughter knew, and she wasn't telling anyone.
Right.
I don't know. Let's read the next passage here. Did we do 14 and 15? No, not yet. What? 14 and 15 is next. It's
okay, yeah.
This one right here, yeah.
So Moses feared and said, "Surely this thing is known." When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting? You don't really hear too many bad things about Moses other than him cursing a rock. But he was a murderer. I understand that it sounds justified, but I don't think that's how the legal system actually works. You don't just see someone being an asshole and kill them. You know?
Yeah, and one of the things with Moses too, and you see this with other characters, like what we've seen in Genesis, there seems to be an arc in their life where early on, like remember Jacob, early on, they're kind of a punk.
Right.
Then they end up being like a fugitive, or they run away to another land.
Right, yeah.
And then they take their lumps and they learn, and then they come back later and everything's better and they're like the hero and everything. Yeah, very similar, like the hero's journey,
right.
that typical trope. I feel like Moses goes through that too.
You know, it's just funny. Whenever I thought about Moses, I always thought of him as kind of timid. since he had to get Aaron to help him out.
Good
So
point.
that's how I always looked at him.
Well, I always pictured him more like a Mike Tyson,
Okay.
where he was probably pretty damn tough, but like when he opens his mouth, people are like, I don't know if that's the thing you should do.
I get that.
You know what I mean?
They make fun of the way Mike Tyson speaks often,
Yeah.
even though he's, could kick their ass.
Yeah, you do not make fun of Mike Tyson to his face.
Right.
You just don't do it. Does Mike Tyson know that he talks funny? Sure, he knows.
Mm.
Yeah. That's how I always pictured Moses, because Moses is kind of a tough guy. We're going to find out here even more in the next couple of verses.
Mm.
Yeah, but so he's in Midian. Anything else we should say before we read 16 and 17?
I think that's it.
This is where it starts to get kind of fun. He shows up at a well.
He does.
Right? How many wells have we read about so far?
It's been a lot of wells.
Feels like 100.
Yeah. It's just the congregating place, I guess.
It is
It's a good place to meet women. Just ask Jacob.
100%. Here's some of the popular wells so far. In Genesis 16, Hagar escapes to the wilderness because Sarah's mean to her, and she meets God at a well.
Yep.
In Genesis 21, Hagar and Ishmael are saved when God shows them a well in the desert. In Genesis 24, Eliezer finds a wife for Isaac at the well. In Genesis 26, Isaac and Abimelech make a pact after there's a handful of fightings about wells. And then in Genesis 29, Jacob meets Rachel at a damn well. So like this is the place.
I guess back in the day, where else would you meet people, right?
It is the place of congregation. If not at the city gate, then at least at the well. This is like the public meeting place I have to for people that are outside of the city.
Right. People are probably just hanging around,
That's my thought. It's like you said, like it's just the office watering hole.
Water cooler.
People spreading gossip. People talking, swapping stories, probably. Flocks drinking water. People chilling out, taking a break. It's hot. Desert. Especially in Midian. Very desert-like. Let's read 16 and 17.
Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs, to water the troughs.
It's a tough word.
Yeah, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Then the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. Just like you said, he's a bit of a badass.
Right.
I mean, he's up against a bunch of shepherds, right? And Moses, he's just one.
Yeah.
So either was stupid or jacked.
It seems to be a trend because Jacob, when he went up to the well, was like, I'll muscle the big old stone off the well. Yeah. Nothing to fear, all by myself. And then here, Moses is like, I'm about to pistol whip these boys if they don't leave these 7 virgins alone.
It seems like all the good women of the Bible, what have you, are cast as beautiful, and all the good men are cast as muscular.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I feel like it's such a trope that it's hard to believe this is literally how it went down.
Like, with the exception of Absalom, I feel like most of the biblical heroes are masculine. Absalom was characterized as beautiful and having long hair. A little bit different. So, but I think you're right. There seems to be a trope the Bible follows. The women are beautiful and the men are manly. Right? They're protectors. The shepherds came and he drove them away. I wondered, and there's no answer, but I often wondered, how many shepherds do you think were there?
You know what? The Egyptians still had authority around there, right?
Well, see, that's the thing is the Midianite region, That is one region where I'm inclined to believe that the Egyptians probably didn't even care about.
Okay.
There was like almost nothing there. Hell, there's still almost nothing there today. It is really like a rocky desert outpost. And I'm inclined to believe that the population there was so small
Hmm.
that the Egyptians probably just left it alone.
So here's my thought. I have no idea what we're. Oh, I lost my brain. I hate that.
Well, I think the thing we can learn from the Bible so far.
Okay, here's maybe what's going on is that. So obviously Moses is fleeing for his life, but I doubt everybody knows that, especially the people in Midian. So all they see is a big hulking Egyptian, and obviously they're, even if Egypt doesn't have much authority, obviously you mess with one of them, they're gonna quickly, kill everybody.
They are still the big dogs on campus,
Yeah.
even if they don't have leadership in Midian.
And I mean, he was probably wearing a lot of things that made him look Egyptian.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
They thought he was Egyptian. They called him an Egyptian, right? So they probably, the people at the well probably recognized him as having some level of authority.
Yeah.
Plus, if he escaped in his standard Egyptian garb, it would have been a garb that is like at least semi-royal. He
Mhm.
wasn't wearing peasant's clothing.
Right.
In fact, a lot of peasant Egyptians were nearly naked.
Mm.
They almost didn't wear any clothing, especially not while they were working.
The Egyptians,
Yeah.
even and the Hebrews,
Well,
both
the
didn't have
Egyptians.
both didn't have much clothing,
Classically, the Egyptians did not wear much clothing.
just because, or
It was
because it.
hot.
Mm, I guess that's why. Well, I was just wondering if that was because they were poor or something.
Both.
Because I mean, I thought we were supposed to look at it as though the Egyptians were more well off than the Hebrews, but
They were, but the slave class weren't.
were there a slave class of Egyptians?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
The slaves and the peasants wore next to nothing. In fact, a lot of the slaves were literally naked. And I don't think a lot of people know this about the ancient world.
Mm.
In the ancient Near East, it was not a problem for a slave to be naked, to just be naked. That's it. They got literally nothing, not even sandals. They're just buck naked. They don't even know if they're going to eat this week. That's how bad off it was. A lot of slave traders, they'd be riding around with carts of people nearly all naked, just all naked slaves. And it was not always necessarily true about the men, but definitely the women slaves were almost nearly always topless. But female slaves in the ancient world were so sexualized, but also so common that there's like a weird dichotomy there. We think of like a female slave going around naked would be a problem because men would just be aroused all the time. And that wasn't a concern in the ancient world because female slaves didn't really have autonomy over their bodies anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Their slave owner could just
Right.
decide they were going to do whatever they want with them. And that was pretty common in the ancient world. So I think people were just used to seeing naked slaves.
Right.
I don't know. It's messy. The long and short of it is Moses was not a slave.
Right.
He had proper Egyptian clothing, and he probably looked as though he wasn't a peasant. I'm inclined to believe they probably knew he was from the upper echelons of society in Egypt.
Yeah, kind of makes him sound like less of a badass because he probably knew that they weren't going to mess with him. You know what I mean?
I think that was the point I was getting at is they didn't just know that he was Egyptian. They knew that he was a special Egyptian, a man with means.
Right.
They didn't know his backstory yet.
Right.
But anyways, I say all that to add one more thing only, and that is if you're looking for female companionship, go get a drink.
Right.
And go beat somebody up or lift a heavy stone. Probably impress somebody. I don't know. Or get you arrested. I don't know. I'm just saying it seems to work in the Bible.
Yes. Yes, it does.
You just need to impress some women at the watering hole with some feats of strength and think you're good to go. You'll get somebody. Yeah.
We just have to find a well.
I know.
Right.
Yeah, where do we what do we pull this off at?
Africa.
I'm okay here.
All right.
Let's do 19 through 22, huh?
Sure. And they said, oh, I think we.
Or we skip something?
Oh no. Yes.
Oh, we
did.
have to do
18.
18, so yes, sorry.
When they came to Rael, their father said, when they came to Rael, their father, he said, "How is it that you have come so soon today?" So normally the daughters get driven away often and have to return to the well only to get driven away again? Because otherwise, why would the father be so surprised that they return so soon?
Well, I'm curious if maybe the reason why it takes so long normally is because they're waiting around for nobody to be there.
Oh, okay.
So they don't have an incursion.
Hmm.
Because 7 women shouldn't be watering their flock around all the men anyways, because it's very dangerous for them. They can't defend themselves.
Hmm.
Rape was common in the ancient world.
Okay.
A lot of times, if you raped a young woman, your punishment was to
To
pay
marry
double
them?
the bride price and marry her.
Yeah.
Not a lot of disincentives.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So young women at the watering hole were probably in a dangerous situation without male protection, and so they probably would wait for a clearing. If I had to
Okay.
guess, someplace safe.
This guy must have had like no sons or something.
That's the thing. It seems like no, and I think as we read the next couple of verses, it becomes even more apparent that he doesn't have any sons.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, before we go on, I want to make one other mention. His name is Reuel. Okay. His name is also Jethro.
Oh, okay.
Because the Exodus narrative obviously was told in 2 different strands, as we've been studying the documentary hypothesis the last couple months. And in some parts of the Exodus narrative, the father-in-law is named Jethro, and in some, his name is Reuel.
And why is that again?
Because there were 2 separate Exodus narratives that got smushed together into one narrative.
And they just couldn't decide on one name?
Basically. Yeah, so Jethro, the name, shows up in Exodus 31, 4:18, 18:1, 18:2, 18:5, 18:6, 18:9, 18:10, and 18:12. And then again, outside of Exodus, the name shows up as well.
I guess this guy has a bit of a role other than this, huh?
Yeah. So the alternation throughout the Bible between Reuel and Jethro is a little bit confusing.
Yeah.
I just pointed out now to let you know that when it says Jethro later,
okay,
like in chapter 3,
yeah,
you're not thrown off.
I would be thrown off.
Right.
Okay. Huh.
So let's read 19 through 22.
And they said, "An Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and he also drew enough water for us and watered the flock." So he said to his daughters, "And where is he? Why is it that you have left the man? Call him, that he may eat bread." Then Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah his daughter to Moses, and she bore him a son. He called his name Gershom, for he said, "I have been a stranger in a foreign land." That escalated quickly. They invite him over bread, and he ends up crashing on their couch forever.
Yeah. Wild. Sorry, my sister's calling me.
Oh.
Been trying to get a hold of her for 2 weeks. She finally calls me now while I can't answer.
Yeah.
So, yeah, quite an escalation in narrative, eh?
Yeah.
It's almost like they skipped over a whole section of his life just because apparently that wasn't important and nothing happened.
Right. He was probably just working there.
Chilling.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always love the reaction that Reuel has. It says, he said to his daughters, "Where is he? Why Why have you left the man?
Mhm.
Call him. How desperate was this father to marry off at least one of his daughters
Right.
and not have 7 liabilities into his old age,
Yeah, I get that.
right? If you had 7 daughters and no sons, also, you're literally swimming in the estrogen ocean. How much would you give just to have another man
Right.
around,
Yeah, I
right?
get that.
So,
Someone to watch like the game with, you know?
right. It seems to me that this is like peak storytelling. This is exactly what you would expect if this story was happening.
Mm.
You know what I mean? There's no way he would have been like randomly, oh, a wealthy Egyptian who protected all 7 of my daughters. I don't want them here.
Right.
That's crazy. Bring them here. Eat some bread. Have my daughters. That seems like the thing that would be the thing, you know? And as evidence, because he's content to live with the man, I have to assume.
Right.
Here's what I don't know. How many times did he break bread with Raul before Raul was like, hey, by the way, you want to just like bunk up? Or do you think it was the first time? First time he comes over, realizes he doesn't have a home, and he's like, oh, well, you can just live here. And while you're here, bunk a couple of my daughters.
I mean, that's pretty likely, yeah. I would be interested to know, does Moses ever end up telling Rael that he's a fugitive? Does that happen later in the Bible here?
I don't think so. But Jethro goes up to meet Moses in the desert after he leads the people out.
Oh.
And he actually helps Moses. Like
Okay.
he becomes part of the Exodus crew. Like he's chilling with the Israelites. Like
Well,
Jethro's
okay.
pretty dope.
And he's a Midian. So that's not an Egyptian or a Jew?
Right. But here's the interesting thing. The Midianites are actually connected with Yahweh worship through archaeology. We know this. The area where the Midianites lived are connected with the worship of Yahweh. In fact, in that territory, he was known as a deity associated with metallurgy. So here's the fun thing. There's a fringe, maybe not fringe anymore, but a side theory that Moses learned about Yahweh through Jethro. He wouldn't have learned it from his upbringing unless his mom taught him, but
Right.
they were in Egypt for 100 years. How much did they really remember about anything from their forefathers? Not that much.
Well, where would Rael get his information from?
Well, I don't know. I'm just saying that Rael, if he was a Midianite in that time period, there is a likelihood that he already would have been, if he was a priest, he was a priest of Yahweh.
He was a priest? Does it say that?
Yeah, like 3 times. We've already read it.
No, it never mentioned he was a priest.
Yeah, it did.
No, it didn't.
It literally did.
No.
It says in verse 15, Moses fled from Pharaoh and he settled in the land of Midian and he sat down by a well. The priest of Midian had 7 daughters.
I don't think that's what it said.
It says the priest of Midian had 7 daughters.
Can you scroll up?
In verse 16, it says that. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters.
Yeah, whatever. All right.
The long and short of it is, we know historically there is a connection with that territory and the worship of the god Yahu or Yahweh, depending.
Who?
It's the same name, different pronunciation. It's Yahweh, okay? The long and short of it is, there is a theory that Moses actually learned about Yahweh through the priest of Midian. And remember, there's one other famous priest that we've already read about, Melchizedek. Now, Melchizedek, even though he wasn't from Abraham, was a priest of Elohim, the God of the Israelites, El. Okay? So, some people theorize that the reason why his being a priest is important here is because even though it doesn't say it, just like Melchizedek, this was a priest who worshipped the true God, not a foreign God, which is, of course, why he joined the Israelites in their Exodus, right? Because they were already worshiping the same God. Make sense?
Yes.
Just some food for thought there.
A lot of food.
Anyways, we said a few things about the women and the daughters and the bread and the boinking. Is there anything else we should mention before we move on?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Now let's read 23. We're almost done actually. We only got a couple verses left.
We are.
Let's do 23.
Now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. Then the children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out. And their cry came up to God because of the bondage. So without all the bondage, God may not have ever heard them. This is very similar to Hagar crying, and remember?
It is.
God's, saying, "Wow, good thing I heard you."
And the narrative in Genesis 18 where he says he has to come down and check out the cry that had risen up to him and see if it is as bad as it seems. And then he says, and if not, I will know. So in Genesis 18, he has to come down and inspect Sodom and Gomorrah to see if the cry. Right. So this is very reminiscent of this ancient idea that God literally lived in the skies. And if the outcry was so great, it would rise up. The same way when Noah offers sacrifices and whatnot, the pleasing aroma rises up and the Lord can smell it. Right. It was very tangential God. He was right next to you. You see what I'm saying? In the Pentateuch. It's not until you get into the latter parts of the Bible where you get this really weird Greek version of God where he's in everything, but he's also invisible and nowhere, and you can't touch him, and he has no body. Like, that's not at all what we read in the Pentateuch. He's very much not that. He's very much anthropomorphized.
But I mean, all they could do was go based on their other gods at the time, right? The false gods, and so they were just making comparisons to them, right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if you believe the narratives, right, and God, the way he's described is accurate. Like when it says that God said something, if you believe God actually said that thing, then I think it would be incumbent on us to believe that the God being described here has a physical body, and he's described throughout the first half of the Bible as having a body, feet and eyes and nose and everything.
I think they're just trying to personify him, to make him more able to relate to us.
Maybe that's certainly a possibility, except that he says himself that the offerings are a pleasing aroma to him.
Well,
and he calls the sacrifices in Leviticus, he says it's my food.
I don't know what to say to that one.
I know, it's rough, right? Anyways, we'll touch on that, because when we get through other parts of Exodus, there will be more passages that describe the body of God. In fact, there's a really good book on it by Francesca Stavroulopoulos. I will never pronounce her name correctly. Francesca Stavroulopoulos, whatever, called God and Anatomy. And it was her PhD dissertation that got turned into a book. But it takes all the passages of the Bible describing God's body, and it turns it into a really good digestible book format. And then there's another book from Esther Hamori who wrote similar to this. It was called When Gods Were Men. Both those two books, I think, would give you a really good flavor of how the Pentateuch treats God. But I had a thought. We talked previously about the Pharaoh being Ramses. I think there's one other reason, one really good reason why the Pharaoh that enslaved the Egyptians could be Ramses. Okay. In verse 23, which we just read, it says, after a long time, the king of Egypt died. Ramses II was like one of the longest serving pharaohs ever in Egypt. He served for like 60 something years. It was from 1279 to 1213. So a ton of time. Like most kings, if you even serve 30 years is a long time. So it's very possible that after a long time, the king must be Ramses too, because the other Ramses don't really serve all that long. And there was a string of Ramses that came after Ramses II. So I just only say that because people trying to pinpoint a time period listening to this, that's just one more piece of evidence that we could put into the collection to say maybe it was Ramses II that was the pharaoh during this enslavement period.
I have nothing to add to that one.
Okay.
I barely understand it.
That's fine. Let's read 24 and 25.
So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. God is so silly. He's always forgetting this hundreds of years old covenant with his people.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Interesting verb that they used here for mine says God took notice of them. Yours says God. Did it say God remembered them? Is that what you had?
Acknowledged.
Oh, acknowledged.
Yeah.
That's an interesting. So
Right.
the root here the root here seems to be yada, which is very similar to the root word to know, like when it says Adam knew his wife. But according to the the form that we have it here in the exact spelling, it really just means to notice or to know or to hear. So I don't know how to word that. Mine says notice, yours says acknowledge.
And then the message says
Some say something else. Yeah, what's the message?
God understood.
Yeah. I think no matter how we do it, we have to.
King James Version, God had respect unto them.
That's possible too, yeah.
He had respect for them?
Well, I think no matter how we take the word, it's going to be some sort of idiomatic usage, because like the root word.
Oh, look at this. A new living, and knew it was his time to act.
The NLT is trash.
It's still there.
Like the NLT is almost as bad as the Message.
That's pretty bad.
I know, and I know a lot of the translators of that Bible too.
In real life?
Yeah.
Oh.
That is not a good study Bible.
Okay.
I would not use that as a study Bible.
About easy to read version. He knew that he would soon help them.
I definitely wouldn't do that. That's for like children. You might just start reading the International Children's Bible and let me know how that goes for you.
Okay.
I think that's the ICB. You can just start using the ICB, the International Children's Bible.
Okay. Is that easier to understand than the Message?
Yeah, actually.
Let me see if it's available. Oh, it is. Look, it's available.
So anyways, long and short of it, verse 24 and 25, God remembered his covenant, and then he, started to pay attention to Israel. I find the wording difficult. Here's the thing. I know that when it says God remembered, it's just an idiomatic expression. The word zakar doesn't mean literally that God forgot and then he later remembered. There's lots of idiomatic usages to demonstrate that it just means like at this point God took account of something. But here's the thing. Like, there's not a good way to say that in English. How would you say it in English?
I'm not even sure what message you're trying to get across.
What I'm saying is where it says, so God heard their groanings and then God remembered his covenant. It sounds like he forgot about his people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But I'm not entirely sure that's the best way to translate it. The problem is I don't know a better way to translate it. Like, how could you say that without it sounding like God forgot his people?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't know. I liked the translation where it was like, and then he decided to act. You know, it doesn't mean he forgot. It just meant he was biding his time, waiting for it to get, I guess, bad enough.
Which brings up a good point because God didn't forget about the people.
Right.
God said in Genesis 15 that they were going to spend 400 years in Egypt
Right.
because the sin of the Amorites had not been completed. So it's not like he forgot. He couldn't have forgotten
Right.
because he knew he sent them there. In the whole Joseph narrative,
Mm-hmm.
Joseph says that God sent me ahead of you to prepare the way. So, like, the whole narrative is building up to like they're there on purpose. God put them there,
Right.
so he couldn't have forgotten about them.
Right.
I don't know. It's just maybe poor wording.
I mean, he knew they were going to be there for a while. He also knew that he needed to save them eventually.
Right.
So this is probably just saying, okay, they finally reached a tipping point.
Right.
And so God is going to come and act finally.
Yeah, I think that's what's happened here. Yeah. I just think it's unfortunate wording from the narrator. That makes sense?
Yeah.
He probably could have found a better way to say it.
Right.
Either way.
Then again, that's probably how he thought of it at the time, right?
That's a good point. Yeah, what if the narrator, the way he was thinking of the story, it was like, well, God was busy doing something and eventually he remembered us.
Yeah.
You know, maybe the narrator is literally saying that. Maybe the narrator is just
Is it possible at the time the narrator at least didn't believe in this omnipresent what have you God?
I actually don't think that the narrator of Genesis or Exodus believed in like this Greco-Romanized version of God that was like more philosophical than like tangible.
And that's the only way he can take it is that God forgot and is remembering it, right?
Yeah, just how like at the seventh day God rested. God doesn't need to rest if he's like the Greek version of a all supreme deity. He doesn't get winded. You know what I mean? What's he resting for?
Right.
And I know that the word that they use there just literally means to cease. But if you read the rest of Genesis and Exodus, it seems that what's being said there was that he rested, which is obviously why the Hebrews have to rest, right? So it seems if you take into account the rest of the narrative, it's implying that God had to rest, which once again paints kind of a picture of God that he's not like omnipotent and omnipresent. Like God in Genesis and Exodus does not have omnipowers.
Right.
And even in Judges, there's a couple battles in the book of Judges where Yahweh loses because it says he couldn't overcome the iron chariots. Like Judges like 119 maybe. This one doesn't. No one really reads Judges for some reason, but it's one of the funnest books. But in Judges 1, I think it says in 19, the Lord was with the men of Judah, and they took possession of the hill country, and but they were unable to drive the people from the plains because they had iron chariots. But the NIV actually betrays the literal rendering of the text. Let's go to the New King James Version. I think it's a little more clear. So the Lord was with Judah, and they drove out the mountaineers, but they could not drive out the inhabitants of the lowland because they had iron chariots. That's a little better. So God, who was with them, enabled them to capture part of the land, but not all of the land because they had iron chariots, which is odd. If God was the one enabling you to win the victories, why their iron chariots mattered.
Right. Yeah.
You know? So the God of the early portions of the Bible just is not an omni style God. And that's okay. That's the part that baffles me of people that cling to this idea that God must have all these omni properties.
But they were just writing him as they understood him at the time, right?
Yeah.
So You can't really expect more than that, right?
Yeah, well, I think everybody was. Everybody in the Bible was describing God
Mm-hmm.
in the way that they thought God was.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But does God ever say that he is these omni things? Does God ever say he's omnipresent?
I have no idea.
He doesn't. You know,
Mm.
does he ever say that he's omnipotent? Not really. Does he ever say that he's omniscient? Nah, he definitely doesn't. In fact, there are things that we've already talked about where he doesn't know. You know? So like I said, I think the biblical view of God is a little bit different than like the Christianized American view.
Mm.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big rabbit trail. I don't want to kill any more time on that.
Okay.
We got plenty of time for that when we read in Exodus 24 about God's feet.
Okay. Looking forward to it.
Pretty good one. And his face in Exodus 33.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
When they
And
go
his
up on
backside.
the mountain or something.
And his hand.
Mm-hmm. When he passes by Moses, right? Yeah.
Yep. A lot of stuff going on there. So you've read it. You know some of the stories.
I do know some of the stories.
Yeah. And his hot nose.
God's hot nose.
Yeah, when he almost kills the Israelites in the book of Exodus, and Moses talks him down
Mm-hmm.
from killing all the Israelites. It talks about God's hot nose.
Oh.
As a description, it's an idiomatic expression for when someone's upset.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Just like sometimes it'll describe somebody's wide nose. When does your nose get wide?
When you're lying?
When your nostrils flare because you're upset.
Oh, I was thinking of Pinocchio. All right.
There's lots of fun idioms in the Bible concerning body parts.
Mm-hmm.
The nose is a popular one. We'll talk about all those though,
Right.
because they show up in Exodus. The author loved God's body parts in Exodus.
Okay.
All right, Dan, I've said too much and now I'm out of things to say. Do you have anything to say?
I sure don't. Wow. This took a while.
I don't know why you always think we're going to cover a whole bunch of ground in like 1 hour. I have no idea where you have this.
This was 2.5 hours.
Uh-huh. I told you it would be 3 hours. We actually ended short.
Wow. We're doing good. We're doing good. You want to get into chapter 3?
Yeah,
We
you
got
know
another
what?
20 minutes.
I'll pray about it.
Okay.
I'll let you know when God answers.
Let me know.
Might not be tonight.
All right. Whatever.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for being here. We're gonna try to do 2 chapters every week,
And then we can be done in 5 months.
rather than taking a whole year to cover Exodus. But that means there's probably going to be a few weeks where we don't read every single verse. These were short chapters, but we got some long chapters coming up. On our long chapters, we're probably going to cut some of the fluff down and the repetition down and just read the vital portions. So that'll help us get through a little bit faster, because as much as I would love to take a whole year going through Exodus, I don't know if it's necessary. You know what
I'd
I
like
mean?
to get through more of the Bible before I die.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind covering more of the Bible, taking 1 year for every book.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're going to spend 5 years before we even make it out of the Torah.
Yeah.
And if you think this is bad, wait till you get to Leviticus and you get all those laws.
That's going to be our version of Wander in the Desert.
Yeah, I'm going to love it.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching.
Yeah.
Like, comment, share. If you think that we missed any important tidbits, let us know. Because 10 of us will always catch more than 2 of us. And if you think there are like some questions that we provided answers to that have better answers, let us know. If you guys have better answers than we do, we would love to know what those answers are. So with that, we'll see you in a week.
Bye, guys. Bye, Lizzie.
My mouse stopped working.